It's 7:45 a.m. over in Paris. I'd like to give a very warm welcome to Captain Paul Watson.
Okay, thank you. I'm here in Paris, where at the end of this year we're going to have yet another international conference on addressing the threats to our environment. I attended the United Nations Conference on the Environment in 1972, and again I attended it in 1992 in Brazil, the first one being in Sweden. And not a single, suggestion, proposal, plan of any of those conferences was ever carried out. So will this just be another get-together for international leaders to have some expensive dinners and photo ops, or will they actually address some of the issues? The problem is when governments get together, they don't really address the solutions. They, usually it comes down to, can we tax anybody over this? Like carbon taxes or whatever. But there are real solutions. And the problem is that people, they want to see change, but they don't really want to change. And what we have to address here is the problem of what we're doing to our oceans. The ocean is the life support system for this planet. It provides food, it provides oxygen. About up to 80% of the oxygen is supplied by phytoplankton in the sea. It regulates temperature, storms. It is the life support system. And on Spaceship Earth, that life support system is run by a crew. And we're not crew, we're just simply passengers. We're having a great time amusing ourselves. But the crew, well, we're killing them. Everything from the bacteria through to the plankton, to the fish, to the great whales, to the trees, we're killing them. And there's only so many crew members you can kill before the machinery begins to collapse. And that's where our future is heading right now, a collapsing life support system. One of the things that I want to bring to this conference here in Paris is the need to replenish diversity in our oceans. The industrial fishing fleets have destroyed 90% of the fishes over the last 16 years. The whaling industry has devastated entire whaling populations, driven many of them to the brink of extinction. And these are the species that keep everything running in the sea. For example, a blue whale. One blue whale every day defecates 3 tons into the sea. 3 tons of iron, nitrogen-rich fertilizer. And that, of course, provides nutrients for the phytoplankton, which in turn provides food to the zooplankton, which provides food to the fish, and ultimately, again, to the whales. Since 1950, we've seen a 30 to 40% decline in phytoplankton populations in the ocean. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we've diminished the whale population so much. We killed 300,000 blue whales in the 20th century. That's an incredible amount of iron and nitrogen-rich fertilizer that has been taken away from the sea. We humans, we take fish from the sea and put nothing back. We have actually no long history of being part of that ecosystem. And so we've been rather destructive about it. Fishermen will say, well, we need to get rid of the seals and the dolphins and the seabirds because they're eating all our fish, like we own those fish. But the fact is if you want more fish, you need more seals, you need more dolphins, you need more whales. It's a cycle that's worked perfectly for millions of years, and we have destroyed that cycle. 300 years ago, there was no shortage of fish in the oceans. When Jacques Cartier set out from France to Canada in 1534, there were some 45 million seals in the North Atlantic, including species that are now extinct. There were animals like the sea mink, the Atlantic gray whale, and the giant auk, and once there were even walrus in the North Atlantic, all gone. Used to have beluga whales in Long Island Sound off of New York, all gone. The tragedy is that not only have we destroyed them, we've actually forgotten that they've ever existed, and that diminishment has been ongoing. I was raised in a fishing village in eastern Canada. I've seen that diminishment in the seas. If we can replenish our ocean, and that means a total ban on industrialized fishing operations, long lines, trawlers, seiners, we have to get rid of them. If there's going to be any fishing, it has to be artisanal only, local fishermen. You know, we always talk about the jobs that are at the sea. We don't talk about the people who really lose their jobs. 1 million Indian fishermen put out of work because of the Norwegian dragger fleets going down their coasts. Somali pirates driven to desperation because the real pirates, the European and the Asian fishing fleets, came in and took everything out of their waters. Within 10 years' time, we're going to have the pirates of Mauritania, the pirates of Senegal, because right now, at this very moment, we have those industrialized fishing operations plundering those seas, taking everything they can. Sea Shepherd just returned from Operation Icefish, which is one of our most successful campaigns. We left with 2 ships, the Sam Simon and the Bob Barker, in December, and set out to find 6 of the most notorious poaching vessels in the world, fishing on Patagonian Antarctic toothfish in the southern oceans. On December 17th, the Bob Barker found the most notorious of them all. That was the Thunder, and began a chase. That chase lasted for 110 days, from the coast of Antarctica to western Africa off the equator, just off of Sao Tome. And with nowhere to run, on April 6th, the Thunder scuttled their own vessel to destroy the evidence. But our crew managed to get on board before it went under the sea, and were able to recover that evidence. And they rescued the crew, turned them over to the Sao Tome officials. They're still under detainment. When they left, when they began running, they dropped 72 kilometers of gill net into the sea. Our vessel, the Sam Simon, spent 200 hours recovering that gill net. And that gill net has now been offloaded in Germany, where it will be recycled into clothing, because that's part of our project called the Vortex Project, which is to remove plastic from the oceans and recycle it. That campaign, which is our toothfish campaign, resulted in Malaysia seizing 2 other vessels, Thailand seizing 1. And as it happened, the remaining 2 decided to head off to a place and sneak into a port up in Cape Verde Island. And of all the places to choose, they chose the one country where we actually had a patrol vessel off the West African coast. And although they changed their name and their flag, Captain Peter Hammerstead was able to identify the vessel. And last week it was also detained, boarded, and that meant that all 6 of these toothfish vessels have been now shut down. So it's been a highly successful campaign. But what I want to really illustrate here is that we were, as a non-government organization, able to shut down these notorious poaching operations, whereas over the last 10 years, the governments of the world have done very little to do anything to stop them. And the reason for that, I think, is because there's just simply no political or economic motivation on the part of governments to uphold international conservation law. And this is what has led to the tragedy of overfishing around the world, to the depletion of the whales. You know, we've been condemned as everything from eco-terrorists to pirates for opposing the Japanese whaling operations in the Southern Ocean. Well, people forget that there is an international global moratorium on whaling worldwide, and that this is the Southern Ocean whale sanctuary, and you don't kill whales in a whale sanctuary. For 10 years, we battled them. Australia finally took Japan to court. The Japanese were condemned by the International Court of Justice, yet still they say they're going to continue whaling. The International Whaling Commission has condemned them. But what I'm proud to say is that after all of those years, what gives us such a sense of satisfaction is that there are 6,000 whales in the Southern Ocean that are swimming there now that would otherwise be dead if we hadn't have intervened. The passion that my volunteers bring to the table is something that you cannot get. You can't pay people to do what our people do for nothing. And so Sea Shepherd has now become an international movement, no longer an organization, but a movement in 40 countries. At any time, we have over 100 people at sea. Right now, we have our vessel, the Martin Sheen, in the Sea of Cortez, protecting the endangered vaquita. We have 3 vessels being prepared to go up to protect pilot whales off the Danish Faroe Islands this summer. We have our vessel, the High Ramona Sandoval in Cape Verde, protecting turtles and patrolling the waters there for poachers. And we just secured 2 new vessels, the Jules Verne and the Farley Moet, which are now in Florida, and we'll be deploying them to protect sharks off of Cocos Island, Costa Rica, and Mapello Island off of Colombia. So what we're building here is an international movement of people, volunteers, who can make a difference. We have to protect our oceans. If the oceans die, we die. We don't live on this planet with a dead ocean, and it's as simple as that. And all ecosystems have to abide by or exist within the context of the three basic laws of ecology: diversity, interdependence, and finite resources. And no species can survive and exist outside those three laws. We need diversity, we need interdependence, and there is a limit to resources, a limit to carrying capacity. And right now, we're stealing the carrying capacity of other species. And for our numbers to grow, they simply have to disappear. And that will lead to the downfall of the human species. It's as simple as that. We're not here to protect the planet. The planet can protect itself quite well. We're here to protect humanity, because if we're going to survive, we're going to have to adapt and learn to live within the context of those laws of ecology. And that means that we have to address the things which are causing the problems. Most greenhouse gases are produced by the development of agricultural, especially the production of meat. 40% of all of the fish taken from the ocean is fed to livestock, to pigs, to chickens. We now have a situation where chickens are eating more fish from the ocean than all the world's puffins and albatrosses. We're feeding more fish to our domestic house cats than are eaten by seals. And we're simply eating the oceans alive, and we have to address that. And that's one of the reasons that for over 15 years our ships have been run as vegan vessels, and we promote this vegan lifestyle, because there simply just isn't the resources to continue to support 7.5 billion people on this planet with the resources that are available. The oceans are being depleted at an alarming rate. And right now, fish is more important, living in the sea, maintaining the ecological integrity of the ocean, than it is on anybody's plate. I found it quite amusing that last week I attended the Cannes Film Festival. I was invited to a dinner that was, raising monies for environmental groups. And at the dinner, they served Chilean sea bass. And when I pointed that out, because they asked why we weren't eating it, and I said, well, because it's an endangered species. And the person across from me said, but you should really try it. It's good. I said, no, we're depleting the oceans, they're disappearing. And she looked at me very puzzled and just said, yes, but it's good. And so it's really hard to get that message across to people, even while those people attending a fundraiser for environmental organizations. They just cannot seem to get that connection that what we eat is destroying our planet and destroying the future of our children. We all have to get involved in this. We can't depend upon governments to solve these problems. They never have solved any social problem. They never do. Governments mainly cause problems, and politicians certainly are the biggest troublemakers on the planet. We have to do this ourselves. As Diane Fossey once said, that we all have to be involved. And Margaret Mead said, never depend upon any government or corporation to solve any social revolution or problem. They never have. All change comes through the passion of individuals. Slavery was ended by people like Wilberforce and Douglass, not by the US government and other governments around the world. So it has to be motivated by individuals. And the same thing is with the conservation environmental movement. We have to all be involved in that if we're going to make a significant change. So what we need, and what I'm very happy to see, is that we're having a global movement that's growing. There's now 3 million non-government registered environmental organizations in the world. There are activists all over the planet that are making a difference. You don't hear about them because they're not really reported. I mean, in fact, 920 of them, according to the New York Times, have been murdered over the last 10 years, and we don't hear much about that. But that really illustrates the kind of courage that these people all over the world are making in order to make a difference. People killed in Amazonia protecting the rainforest. People killed in Costa Rica, protecting turtles. These are very, very courageous people doing the work that needs to be done that governments refuse to do. And one of the reasons for that is that governments are here protecting the economics of what I call the economics of extinction. That there's money to be made by driving species into extinction. A good example of that is the bluefin tuna. Mitsubishi has about 10 to 15 years supply in their warehouses. They could stop fishing today and still provide tuna to their customers for the next for the next 10 to 15 years, but they won't do that because they know that if they do that, that the fish will replenish in the sea. And if they replenish in the sea, that means that the prices will go down because scarcity translates into higher prices and into profits. And if the species are to go extinct, well, Mitsubishi's sitting on a warehouse with 15 years supply. They'll be able to set their own prices on that and make billions of dollars. And every fishing industry in the world is in a similar situation. It's where we are literally investing in the extinction of the species. And for that reason, it's going to be very difficult to get change through government areas. But there are laws. Those laws can be enforced. The United Nations World Charter for Nature allows for non-government organizations and for individuals to actually intervene and to make a difference. Sea Shepherd's not a protest organization. We're an interventionist organization. We see the laws. We see that the laws are not being enforced, and then therefore we go out and we physically enforce them. Well, we also do it with a code of ethics. That means that we do not cause any injury to anybody, and our history is completely unblemished in that regard. We've never caused a single injury. We've never sustained a single injury in nearly 40 years of operations on the high seas in very dangerous campaigns. But we take extreme precautions to ensure that this is done non-violently. We're accused of being violent, but I call that what we do aggressive non-violence. And I think that when you destroy something which is being used to take life, like a harpoon or a gun, that in fact is an act of nonviolence. But in a culture where property takes precedence over life, there is this understanding, however, that when you damage property, that's violent, when in fact, it's an act of nonviolence. We need more of that. The environmental conservation movement is in fact the single most nonviolent movement in the history of the planet. It's also the largest growing movement in the history of the planet, and it is a universal movement. It affects everybody regardless of their religion, their politics, or their philosophies, because if we don't save this planet, we're not going to save ourselves. We're basically at war with ourselves to protect the planet from ourselves, and we are doing this for the benefit of all future generations of all species. And if we don't win, then everybody loses. Thank you.